Making good photographs is pretty easy when we travel to beautiful locations with epic vistas and stunning landscapes. But a photographer goes beyond the obvious because they know there's so much more to capture than what first meets the eye. And not just in exotic locations, but in everyday, mundane environments too. In this video, I'm going to share very practical tips on how to see like a photographer, how to recognize what others overlook, and how to find interesting images no matter where you are. These are techniques that anyone can use anywhere. Think of it as training for photographers, exercises we can all do to get better at our craft. We've all experienced that feeling of excitement when traveling to new places, especially when we go to a different country with a different culture. Everything seems fascinating, even the simplest things catch your eye. That's exactly what happened when I moved here to the US over 10 years ago. I wasn't a photographer yet, but as soon as I arrived, I started taking pictures of everything. The motel-like apartment buildings, games I had never heard of before, demolition derbies, gas stoves, newspaper vending machines, county fairs, oh the county fairs, semi-trucks, American-themed everything, drive-through ATMs, like what? Bars with TVs at every table, even mailboxes. I took a lot of photos of those. Now, I'm not saying those were good photos because they were not, but my senses were fully open to this brand new world. I was aware of everything that was around me. I was seeing. Of course, eventually the novelty wore off. It was fun and interesting the first 10 times, maybe even 20, but everything gets old over time. Before I knew it, I stopped seeing and I stopped taking pictures. This process is called habituation. Habituation makes our brains less sensitive to the environment over time, making it feel familiar and safe, so we can focus on what really matters from a survival point of view. But this process is also what makes photographing the same location over and over so challenging, because our brain is constantly trying to engage autopilot mode, and it feels like a fight that we can't win. That's when we default to the same shots we've already made and we start believing that nothing new can be done. I know this struggle very well. I've had to overcome these feelings and creative ruts many times over my career. But after all this time, I believe that I developed some habits, and I came up with a few techniques that make getting over this a little bit easier. Again, the goal here is to see a place that you're familiar with anew, with fresh eyes, almost like it was the first time that you were there. If you want to start seeing like a photographer, you should try to always have a camera with you. The phone works just fine, but a standalone camera is much better. The RX100 Mark VII is my everyday camera and I love it. I bring it with me almost everywhere I go, including the grocery store. I think I only leave it behind when I go for a run or something like that. Feeling the camera in my pocket immediately puts me in photography mode. It's a reminder to be more aware of my surroundings. I look at the world differently just because I have a camera on me. Seriously, having an everyday camera changed my photography. It made me more sensitive to the little things, and that led to better images, not just at home with that little camera, but also when I go on photography trips and I use my bigger cameras. There's no better way to put oneself into that photography mode than taking the first photo. I know it might sound silly, but there's something that clicks once you simply start doing it. So before you head out, no matter if you are at home or on the road, just take a photo. It could be anything, don't overthink it, but also don't shoot just for the sake of it. Take it seriously, do your best to make it a good one. The goal here is not to create portfolio-worthy images, but to get your creative juices going. I do this all the time, but especially during my photography trips, because it keeps me engaged and observant all day long. But if you struggle with the idea of taking random photos, choose one specific subject. Again, this could be anything. It could be mailboxes, doors, marks on the sidewalk, street signs, benches in the park. It doesn't really matter what it is. Just choose one thing and look for that one thing wherever you go. Remember, it doesn't have to be meaningful. Treat it as an experiment, as practice, as training. We are learning to see here. The problem we are trying to solve with this exercise is the overwhelming feeling we might experience, especially in busy environments when we don't know what to photograph. This technique helps us focus on one thing at a time. It might very well be the case that you end up making some really good images while putting in practice these tips and exercises. New ideas might come to mind to the point that you might want to start a project. That's what happened to me many years ago when I randomly started taking photos of signs prohibiting something. Think of no trespassing signs, no parking, no smoking, you name it. Over time, it became a project that I call No. I have no idea what I'm gonna do with it, but in the meantime, it's helped me quite a bit to stay engaged in places and times when I wasn't seeing anything else. It did, and still does, keep my creativity going even in the low moments that I have, like everyone else. So when I'm not feeling it, I just grab my camera and go out with the only goal of adding yet one more picture, even if it's just one picture, to my collection of signs. And as you might have guessed, this is just a trick to get me out there, because once I'm out there, I might see something else. I've made so many good images while looking for no signs. There's always something different about today, even if it's just slightly. Something that wasn't there yesterday or not in the same way. For example, during my morning walks here in San Francisco, I've been photographing the newspapers on the driveways, you know, the newspapers they throw in the mornings. The headlines are always different. Sometimes I include some context, sometimes I don't. Again, will this become something in the future? I highly doubt it, but I like to challenge myself to find something there. So try to find something new every day. Look out your window and observe. Can you see something, anything that is different today? Maybe the weather, the sky, the ground, the traffic, the people, whatever it might be, start documenting that change with your camera. We can learn a lot from what others see and photograph that we don't, not just from other photographers, but from regular people. I've learned so much about photography from my wife, because she often notices things that I completely overlook. It's not that I like those images that she makes more than the ones I come up with necessarily, but it's always so humbling to see that there are so many other perspectives and ways to look at something other than yours. Another way I learn from others is by looking at the images people upload to sites like Google Maps, for example. Those are often very casual photos, and perhaps because of that, people are freer to photograph anything. So sometimes I go through the photos people upload of spots that I visit often, and I get surprised by the things that people see that I didn't. Again, it's not about those images being better than ours. It's not about going back to those places and taking those same pictures. It's about seeing something, about observing a location, about recognizing what was invisible to us before. If we want to see, we need to pay attention. There's no way around it. It's not about being razor focused, constantly analyzing the landscape, but about avoiding the most common and the worst distractions. The phone is by far the number one on that list, at least for me. It's always there trying to grab my attention, and it will steal it if I give it a chance. And once that happens, my creativity is gone. I have to build the momentum again, which is not easy at all. It's actually very exhausting. Another source of distraction for me is a podcast. I love listening to podcasts, but if the goal of the outing is to make images to see, we probably shouldn't occupy our brain and our senses that way. To find what we had never seen before, we need to stay present and observant. And also remember to be patient. Take your time. You'll be amazed by what you notice. I know it's not always easy or even possible, but try to get out during sunrise and sunset when you can. I'm so thankful to be able to do this almost every day, because those times deliver the best conditions, even for black and white photography. The light is just amazing, and it can transform even the most ordinary scenes into something magical. We've had the best sunrises this past week, and I didn't miss a single one. It's also a great way to start your day, even if you don't take any photos. Sunsets are not bad either. The light at golden hour can be magical, and putting a little bit of magic in your life is always a good thing. So every place has something that makes it shine. Here in San Francisco is the fog. In my opinion, the Midwest looks the best in wintertime under a layer of snow. Summer is best for alpine locations. Maybe it's an annual event like a pilgrimage or a county fair or whatever. So when those conditions or that something happens, then you know it's photography time. Also, be aware of the changes that happen with every season. It's September now, so the days are getting shorter and shorter, and that brings new photography opportunities that we didn't have a couple months ago. For example, here in the city, the fog rolls in early in the morning and late in the evening, so not too long ago, that was around 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. respectively, and at those times, most people were either still at home getting ready for the day or back and almost in bed. That means that the streets were packed with cars when those magical conditions happened. But nowadays, because sunrise happens later and sunset much earlier, people are usually already out by the time the day begins, and they are not back home yet when the sun sets. So that means that I get much emptier streets with heavy fog, which makes for very cool images. Camera gear does matter. I take most of my photographs with a super zoom lens. It's a 28 to 200 millimeter super zoom lens from Tamron. It's a very versatile lens that allows me to get a lot of different shots, but sometimes I get stuck into making the same ones over and over. That's why I like to switch it up every once in a while and go out with just a couple of prime lenses to force me to see through those focal lengths. With just a couple prime lenses, I can't capture everything. I have to see in 35 or 85 millimeters, and that's the whole point, to get you to see something different. So change it up every once in a while. If you shoot with zoom lenses, try primes. If you shoot with primes, give zoom lenses a try. Change is inevitable. That beautiful tree you've been meaning to photograph, it will be gone one day. Like the sycamore gap tree in the UK, it was chopped down just a few days before I was supposed to photograph it.
A teenage boy has been arrested in connection with the cutting down of one of the UK's most photographed trees, the sycamore gap tree on Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland.
I sometimes have nightmares thinking about a potential local photographer from that area that had been putting it off because that tree was always going to be there. They took it for granted, and now their chance is gone. Also, rules change all the time, especially nowadays with over tourism. Some places are totally oversaturated. They might start closing down some locations or setting some limitations on them. Natural disasters like wildfires can erase a whole landscape. So if there's a location nearby that you've always wanted to photograph, but you have been putting it off because you are assuming that it's always going to be there, please, I beg you, don't wait any longer and just do it. Appreciating what we do have right now should give us that little push that we sometimes need to get out and take some photos. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? It's all about perspective, how we look at the world. A cup of coffee, a roll of toilet paper, anything really can be beautiful if seen and captured with that wonder. Try to find that beauty around your house, your car, your office. Ask yourself, how can I make this thing look beautiful? And even though I'm partial, I suggest to use black and white here because it's an abstraction from reality, and it can make seeing new things or familiar things in a new light easier. While all these tips can do wonders for your photography, sometimes the best way to refresh your vision is to just go somewhere new. But you don't have to go to faraway lands. Anywhere new can bring new perspectives and new ideas, even if it's just a few miles down the road. Make it a habit to regularly explore new places, no matter how close or how far they are. And even though not many people can do this, if you can spend a significant amount of time somewhere else, move to a different town or ideally to a different country, it is then that you might experience that sense of wonder when you actually come back home. This is called the reverse cultural shock. Now the place that you were familiar with, the place where you grew up, looks and feels very different to you. This is actually how I rediscovered my hometown in Spain. It wasn't until I lived abroad here in the US for several years that I saw that place differently, because I went back there with a totally different perspective of the world. To me, photography is not something I do a few times a year when I get to travel to exotic locations. For me, it's a lifestyle, something that I do every day. It's a way to see the world, to perceive it through a different lens. It is in this constant practice that I learn how to see, that I grow, that I appreciate more. Of course, it's easier said than done, and photographing the place where we spend almost every day of our lives can be very challenging. And yet it is in those locations that we might end up making our most significant work. Thousands and thousands of photographers have images from Iceland in their portfolios, but how many of them have images from your hometown? But of course, this can only happen if we are able to keep our minds open and our eyes fresh. My hope is that the tips that I shared today do that for you. Don't forget, there's always an image waiting for you to be made out there. So grab your camera and go make something beautiful. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.